Alright, back again. It's been a while since I've done one of these. I ended up skipping doing an extended thoughts video for Persona 1 and 2 because all of my thoughts on their stories are pretty much there in the reviews. I didn't have anything else to add, and I didn't think I would have as much to say about Persona 5 Strikers as I did with Royal, but there are some things I do want to mention, I just couldn't put them in the review because of spoilers. That's what this is for, and if you've seen my other Persona videos, you should know what to expect by now, so let's not waste any more time and get straight into it. The first thing I want to talk about is actually a slight mistake I made in the review that several of you have pointed out, where I mentioned the Phantom Thieves not having shadows in the jails. I don't know how I forgot about this with how many times I've played Persona 5, but during your first trip to Mementos, Morgana does explain that the Phantom Thieves meeting their shadows would be impossible since they're already in control of their shadows, aka their personas, exactly like what happens in Persona 4. The dialogue's apparently in one of the rest areas in Mementos, but I unfortunately can't seem to find the footage for it without having to play the game again myself, but I do seem to recall that being the case. So okay, that was my bad and I'm sorry for getting that wrong, but then does that mean the Phantom Thieves' bodies act as some sort of substitute while inputting the keyword into Emma? I'm still not entirely sure how this technology works. Speaking of that, some of you did also say that the keywords do transfer someone's shadows to the jails, but I haven't found any conversations explaining that while scrolling through my footage, so I can't say if that's entirely true or not. This only makes things more confusing when Zenkichi is able to step inside the jails before his shadow turns into a persona. If any of the characters have pointed out how this transfer system works, then please point it out to me, as I don't want to start doubting the world building in this game. I appreciate you guys telling me the differences between jails and palaces as well, but A, I already brought up a lot of them in the review, and B, I'm honestly still not convinced that they are different. From a level design perspective, they are a little bit, and the goals are slightly different in that you search for 3 cores and investigate the bird cages, but from a plot perspective, I personally still think they're the same. You're trudging through physical interpretations of various Japanese locations, and you're still changing people's hearts. The method may be somewhat dissimilar, but the concept isn't, and clearing jails leads to the same result as it would in palaces. I'm not dismissing anybody who thinks otherwise, that's just my opinion, though I'm sure some people are gonna tell me I'm wrong no matter what I say. I'm hoping we can at least agree that gathering info on the Monarchs prior to the jails was somewhat half-baked. I was terrified when I first saw this was a thing. I thought it was gonna be just like investigating the TV victims in Persona 4. Those moments where you had to spend days searching for clues about that particular person so that Teddy or Rise could pinpoint their locations in the TV world. Thankfully, that's not what they do here. Investigating the Monarchs only takes a few minutes if you know where to search, which should be pretty easy since the towns are so small. No days pass while doing so, and you only need to snoop around for Alice, Natsume, and Hyodo. For some reason, it just disappears from the 4th jail onwards, which I can understand for the lab and Akane's jail since the lab ruler's dead in the real world and Akane doesn't really do anything outside of the jail, but I figured we'd at least be digging some dirt on Konoe as well. It sorta makes me wonder why this investigation system was created in the first place if it was going to be scrapped after the first 3 dungeons. Minor complaint regardless, it's nothing that ruins the game whatsoever. Before we actually discuss the Monarchs in full detail, I just want to get a few smaller things out of the way first. Very specific things that I thought was worth addressing. First of all, almost every party member is available to you right from the get-go, with only Zenkichi added later on, and you don't get any more members after that. Sadly, as of now, this also includes Akechi or Kasumi. Maybe they'll become DLC in the future, but nothing's been said as of this date. I can understand why Akechi wouldn't be playable given his fate in Persona 5 and Royal, but I sure would have liked to have played as Kasumi. I don't know if I'm going crazy for this either, but does anyone else think that Futaba's character changed maybe a little too much this time around? I mean, I know some time has passed and she's gotten more confident around the Phantom Thieves and strangers, but she almost seems like a completely different person now. The idea of traveling across Japan doesn't bother her at all when she's lived in Tokyo for so long. As someone with autism, I would have been a nervous wreck about that alone. And she's totally okay being naked around other girls as opposed to just a bikini like in Persona 5. You're telling me a long-time shut-in got this much confidence in a year? What the hell am I doing wrong then? The nerdy quips come out in full swing during gameplay too, though I guess not quite as much as Q2. And side note, I eventually did get rather tired of the same repeated quotes during late game, but that's not the character's fault per se. I don't know who decided this in the end, but I also counted a few moments where the game went the cheap cheap route when it came to potentially awesome spectacles. One of them was in Konoe's jail, where the thieves had to get on board an airship and ride it to another point in the jail, but the game fades out and back in again once you do so, skipping the entire journey, though the characters still describe how glamorous the view was, and it's like, well, great, that would have been nice to see, thank you. The other one was the joke involving Haru driving like a maniac, which, to be fair, the game does provide a quick little animation of the RV bouncing up and down and speeding, but I think it also would have been funny to see the Phantom Thieves' reactions. Sadly, that's all left to the aftermath, ending up not being as good of a payoff as it could have been. It's still at least kind of funny with just the initial idea and playing it all in your head, but I think they could have gone a step further with that joke to really bring it on home. The final time was in Akane's jail, and you fight her cognitive versions of the Phantom Thieves, the Photom Thieves if you will. You'd figure this would be some epic battle where everyone would fight their fake counterparts, and that is what happens, but the only one you actually get to see is Joker versus Joker. The fights with the other counterfeits are all done off screen, with the Phantom Thieves providing commentary during the battle. That is so freaking lame. This could have been such an amazing moment to witness, seeing the thieves challenge their most dangerous foes themselves, but nah, that would have been too interesting. Let's just have your comrades awkwardly disappear from the arena and simply have Joker take himself on, which, by the way, Jesus Christ, who cranked up the difficulty for this part? Akane's Joker is ridiculously powerful. It makes sense as to why. He's copying most of Joker's moves after all, but goddamn, he seriously kicks your ass. I'd say he's one of the hardest bosses in the game, and this isn't even near the end of the adventure. It took a few tries for me to take him down, and by then, good god, my hands were sweating. The last of the smaller moments I want to talk about is the bathhouse scene in Kyoto, which is the only part of the story that I really didn't like. Ren, Ryuji, Yusuke, and Morgana are relaxing in the bath, but the girls come in with towels wrapped around them just as the time switch. Now, instead of simply explaining that it was still the boys' turn, they think to sneak their way out of the room, which of course they fail to do when the girls assume they were peeping, thus getting themselves pummeled. If this sounds familiar at all, it should, because this is pretty much beat for beat the exact same setup as the bathhouse scene in Persona 3, right down to the location. Persona 4 had a similar scene to this as well, with the same payoff, twice if you count the extra one in Golden, but they each played out slightly differently. Everyone stripping down to the bare essentials is not the issue I have with Striker's bathhouse scene. Honestly, I couldn't care less about that. Feel free to do whatever you want as long as nobody gets hurt. My problem with it, aside from being a half-ass reference to Persona 3, how the girls are once again in the wrong, and this is the third goddamn time Persona games have done this bit, is that there's no reason for the ladies to suspect that the guys would be peeping. At least in Persona 3, C's weren't the closest of friends just yet, and Ryoji started coming to Gekkoukan, already hitting on the girls, so some suspicion was likely warranted there. Similarly, Persona 4 had Yosuke, who put Chie and Yukiko in swimsuits and entered all of the girls in a beauty pageant against their will, as well as Teddy, who frequently puts the moves on them at any given notice. As for the Persona 5 cast, Ryuji is the only one who could come close to meeting this criteria, but even he's shown that he can be respectful to a lady's privacy, like in Striker's earlier bathhouse scene. I just don't believe this scene was thought out properly. The female Phantom Thieves act completely out of character during this moment and weren't really painted in a good light. It wasn't funny, it wasn't a clever callback, the gag is so tired at this point, hell I didn't think it was that funny in Persona 3 and 4 to begin with, and it all came across as too mean-spirited. Also, Makoto, I love you, but don't ask the guys to explain themselves and then proceed with no excuses. Why don't we just go through the monarchs one by one now? I've already discussed my feelings on Alice in the review, but in short, I don't think she's necessarily a bad first villain at all, but she didn't quite make the same impact as Kamoshida did. I didn't buy the game's attempt to make me feel sorry for Alice because she got bullied a lot. Each of the Phantom Thieves have gone through way worse situations than that, but still didn't succumb to any distorted desires. Bullying is a terrible thing to happen, as a subject to that myself when moving from America to England, but I don't think that should justify Alice's actions in the slightest. And luckily, Ann tells her that and agrees to be her friend in the real world, which we sadly don't get to see happen. Would have been nice to have Alice help Ann in some way or give her a pep talk if she's feeling down, like a sort of role reversal, but oh well. The way they also did Alice's calling card to additionally announce the Phantom Thieves' return was far too soon in my opinion. The scene itself is cool and all, and Xander Mobus uttering even a syllable is always gonna be gold, but it's so obviously trying to capture the same feeling as Shido's calling card in Persona 5. I think Atlus knew that was the best scene in the game, but the main reason Shido's calling card worked so well was because it was the penultimate point of Persona 5, and Joker was about to face the man who put him in prison and ruined his life. Not to mention, it was also the the same person who was running for prime minister and killed Wakaba Ishiki. There were a lot of personal stakes involved that made Shido's calling card so satisfying. Alice doesn't really do anything that earns a calling card at such a grand scale, and this causes the preceding calling cards for later monarchs to be pretty underwhelming. Konoe's calling card's the only one that comes close to matching it, but we'll get to that later. The next monarch is Natsume, who I thought was way better handled than Alice was. His arc's all about how his grandfather wrote a best-selling novel in the past, and he's trying to follow in his footsteps, but the only thing the editors cared about is posting his name everywhere rather than his work, which also turns out to be plagiarized. An had the spotlight when it came to calming Alice down, but now it's Yusuke's turn to scold Natsume, as someone in the creative arts himself. The moral here, as you'd probably expect, is that no matter what, you should try your hardest to make your own work instead of relying on someone else's name. Some may disagree on certain aspects and or attempt to take advantage of you, especially if you're already famous to some degree, but if you're truly passionate about a project and it ends up not going well, then all you need to do is just start over, think about where you went wrong, and climb your way up from there. It's a little predictable, but it's an excellent message nonetheless, and as someone in the creative industry myself, this hits so close to home for me. It can be rather heartbreaking when certain people don't appreciate your work, sometimes even making you depressed and aimless, wondering why you even bother. I've definitely felt that way on multiple occasions in the 10 plus years I've maintained this channel, especially when it comes to something I deeply care about like the Persona series, but I'm still proud of my videos at the end of the day because I put all of that work in and made it my own. The scenes with Yusuke confronting Natsume, as well as greatly developing Yusuke's character even further, also encapsulates the message perfectly. And Natsume's not really a bad person, he just wants his work to be recognized, same as any normal human. His shaky voice can be a bit distracting, particularly when he confesses to the public, and I want to know where the hell security is when Yusuke storms right in front of Natsume during the conference, but those are my only gripes. This is hands down one of the best parts of the story for me, and one of the best moments in the Persona 5 universe. The following monarch you face is then Hyodo, and again, the game does a better job making me feel sympathetic towards her than with Alice, but it falls just slightly short of hitting the same notes as Natsume. The birdcage in this one explains that Hyodo was threatened to be framed for an accident regarding an ice sculpture in the middle of Sapporo that tragically crushed a little girl to death. Now this is more of the darker vibe I was hoping to see in Strikers, even if we don't see the incident actually happen. This time the center of attention goes to Haru, who apparently knew Hyodo when she was very young, and it's her job to remind Hyodo of the kind and gentle person she used to be, as opposed to the cold, heartless boss she is now. I like how there are clearly some hints of decency left in Hyodo when Haru calls her out, and it suddenly makes more sense once you find out her secret, as if she knows what she's doing is wrong, and being so harsh to everybody is the result of her being stressed out from trying to hide the truth behind the accident. The conversation between Hyodo and the girl's mother after finishing the jail is also well done. Hyodo had already told the public she was going to step down as mayor, but the mother bluntly tells her to woman the hell up and stop it from happening again by getting herself elected and changing Sapporo for the better. It's kind of a quick turnaround after the confession, and like I said, I don't think this revelation is quite as powerful as Natsume's, but it's a fairly decent story arc overall. Not amazing, but still fairly good. During this time, the Phantom Thieves also become acquaintances with Kuan Ichinose, who found out their identities because she has good hearing, and maybe something to do with the Phantom Thieves talking about their ideas in the middle of the Medice seminar when they're supposed to be paying attention. Ichinose luckily decides to keep this all a secret though, and by the mother of all coincidences, she also turns out to be the original creator for Emma, but sold it off to Medice. She's surprisingly chill about this whole thing, learning about the Phantom Thieves, jails, monarchs, and how Emma's being used for evil, perhaps a little too chill, and her upbeat personality sending off some weird vibes too. I wonder if she'll be a villain later. Just before the thieves head over to the 4th jail in Okinawa, there's a short detour to Kyoto where we dive a bit more into Zenkichi's personal life. Much like the relationship between Nanako and Dojima in Persona 4, Zenkichi's wife died from a hit-and-run incident, and he's been trying to arrest the killer ever since. But his daughter Akane believes that he's given up on the pursuit, ashamed of her father and wanting nothing to do with him. Akane's resentment towards Zenkichi is probably the only difference between them and the Dojima family, and the thieves come in to explain how Zenkichi Zenkichi really is a hard worker, truly caring about his family. Everyone then comes around to the Hasegawa residence for some dinner, and Akane shows them her room, where you find out she's a huge fan of the Phantom Thieves, complete with her own streaming show that's all about the Phantom Thieves with 50,000 subscribers. Damn her, where can I get that many? After that, it's Makoto's time to shine as she talks to Akane about her feelings towards her dad. This is another one of my favorite scenes in the game, where Makoto brings her deceased father, who also used to be a policeman, and she had the same feelings as Akane when she was younger. This led to some regrets when he eventually passed away, but she's learned to accept it and move on. Akane still gets pretty angry about Zenkichi's work life overshadowing his personal life, but Makoto lightly snaps at her, saying she should be grateful he's doing all he can right now. Akane then starts crying her eyes out, knowing that Makoto's right, and eventually calms down. This is what I was talking about in the review when I said how the scenes not involving jails or monarchs tended to be the most interesting to me, discovering more about the characters we hadn't learned before and letting the Phantom Thieves just breathe for a minute. There's a reasonable amount of these kinds of scenes sprinkled throughout Strikers, but I wish we just had a little more of them. The next day, the group leave Kyoto and head over to Okinawa for a quick beach trip, but later that night, they see that the local residents have started hunting for them, and they think it could be due to the restricted laboratory nearby. Turns out that there is a jail there, but with no monarch, because it's revealed through audio recordings that Medice's head researcher, Shuzo Ubukata, lost his mind when someone told him to hand over his desires, thus plunging himself off a cliff, dying instantly. Sophia keeps hearing voices in this jail as well, and at the end it keeps telling her how useless she is for not having a clear goal in mind. Persona fans then rejoice as Ryuji finally lets out an F-bomb, even Morgana gives up being classy for a second to back up Ryuji, and the voice then transforms into a warden. I'm not really sure what the point of this jail is, to be honest, and it's a pretty short one compared to the other three. We haven't learned a whole lot more than we already know, and Sophia doubting herself got resolved fairly quickly after Ryuji chimed in. At the very least, when they return to the real world, a body has been discovered! And it turns out to be Ubukata's, which means the lab can be investigated for evidence. It's revealed that Akira Konoe, the current CEO of Medice we saw earlier, is in cahoots with former lackey of Shido, Jun Owada. He and Konoe think to use the found body as a means of framing the Phantom Thieves for murder. And if you think that's gonna work again after they were framed for Okumura's death, it unfortunately does. You know, if these sheeple are gonna be swayed so easily, why are we even bothering saving them? Owada is probably the most pointless character in the entire game. He's barely given any screen time and really doesn't contribute much to the plot aside from offering the chief of police a promotion if she catches the Phantom Thieves. He's also revealed to be the one who ran over Zenkichi's wife and killed her, which you'd think would allow Owada to be more involved in the story, but shockingly it doesn't. Konoe's the one doing most of the dirty work, but we'll get to him in a minute. This then leads to armed forces surrounding the Kyoto bathhouse we talked about earlier, and Zenkichi yelling to the Phantom Thieves that they need to run away. He gets arrested for interfering with the police. We get another potentially cool scene of the thieves' escape totally squandered because of the dreaded fade to black, and Konoe uses Emma to turn Akane into a monarch because now she has no one to help her and is unsure if the Phantom Thieves are the heroes she believes them to be. Konoe thinks to use this as a way of turning the tables and changing the hearts of the Phantom Thieves, or just kill them off entirely. The thieves accidentally enter Akane's jail and get themselves trapped, with Futaba being the only one that doesn't get captured due to her tripping and lack of stamina. Sae was luckily called in by Makoto beforehand and uses her skills to bust Zenkichi out of interrogation in an honestly pretty badass comeback, and he makes it to Futaba, who tells him everything that happened. With Oracle's hacking abilities at Zenkichi's disposal, he sneaks his way through the jail and makes it to the detained Phantom Thieves. I thought it was very cool how the music in this place is a mixture of Life Will Change and Wake Up Get Up Get Out There, but in sort of a Kodo style. It suits the look and atmosphere of the jail extremely well in my opinion. This stealth section with Zenkichi is pretty jarring to say the least, but it doesn't last long at all, so there's not really much to talk about. Shadow Akane does eventually corner them, however, and expresses her feelings towards her dad about dealing with his wife's murder, but Zenkichi tells her that he was given a death threat on Akane's life if he did any more snooping, and that he's known who it was for a long while, needing to find the right evidence to put Owada away. Akane refuses to listen though, and wants to carry out her plan of changing the Phantom Thieves' hearts as well as her mother's killer. This is now where Zenkichi awakens to his persona, Valjean, straight out of Les Miserables, helping free the Phantom Thieves and join them to stop Akane, Konoe, Owada, and finally shut down Emma. Akane's jail is also surprisingly short given how big of a bombshell it is in terms of the story. I think Atlus and Koei Tecmo expected you to get lost a bunch of times with all of the warp points scattered around, but I actually didn't have that much of an issue with them, so I managed to clear it in pretty good time. It's an interesting dungeon regardless. I thought it was better than the laboratory, which had rather dull aesthetics and not very elaborate level design to me. At the end, you defeat the fake Joker in one of the most difficult fights in the game. Zenkichi tells Shadow Akane how much she means to him and that he's going to keep trying to put her mother's killer behind bars, and then the real Akane returns to normal in the real world. The Phantom Thieves next head to Osaka to take on Konoe, and Ichinose gets contacted again for his keyword that she finds in a business card. Konoe's jail is obviously heavily inspired by the widespread of technology, and this is where things go back to normal in terms of level design, probably being one of the longest dungeons in the game. There's a bit of confusion from the Phantom Thieves when they discover that Konoe also has a birdcage, since he presumably knows how Emma should work. It turns out he lived in a very abusive household as his dad constantly beats him and even killed Konoe's mother for money. The father then threatens to end Konoe's life as well, but when Konoe notices the show Zephyr Man playing on TV, he realizes that no heroes would come to save him and so takes this chance to kill his own father before he could do the same to him, believing that he'll be a hero in the process. Where the hell did this darker tone come from? The previous Monarchs have had their crappy past, but nothing this messed up. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad it's here. It's the closest we've gotten to matching the more grim elements of Persona 5, but Jesus Christ. At least with Hyodo's past, we didn't actually see the girl get crushed by the ice sculpture. Here you see the abuse play out, okay, sort of, but still it's painful to fully imagine. You can probably see at this point what they're trying to do with Konoe as a character. It's the royal thing again, where the antagonist really does have good intentions and wants to use his abilities to save people like any hero would do. In this case, releasing Emma to a wide audience. Konoe's basically Japanese Tony Stark, and I'm sure everybody's already made that joke online, but it's true. He even kinda looks like Tony Stark. And he also intends to change Owada's heart after defeating the Phantom Thieves. His cooperation was just an act. Right beside Natsume, I feel sorry for Konoe the most out of all of the Monarchs because of what he's been through and that he actually does want to make the world a better place, but I don't think this idea works quite as well as it did in Royal. In my opinion, we haven't heard or seen enough of what Emma does to make things easier for the public, except for Konoe himself. And without giving anything away from Royal, we only get a serviceable amount of screen time dedicated to him, and when we do see him, he's mostly shifty and clearly a bad guy. If we had maybe a couple of scenes where Konoe had a smidge of regret or was unsure if what he was doing was right, that might have worked a bit better. What we've got isn't bad at all. Like I said, Konoe's one of the most interesting Monarchs in the game for me, but I feel like there could have been slightly more to him to make him an outstanding villain. When the thieves find an infiltration route to Konoe, it's then time to send the calling card in a flashier style. They decide to hijack a blimp and speak into the microphone, announcing that they're gonna change Konoe's heart, while dropping a whole load of printed calling cards that they somehow managed to get onto that blimp in the first place. Now this could have been a great rival to Shido's calling card and maybe improved on Alice's calling card somewhat, but I personally feel that it was botched quite a bit by having Zenkichi and Ryuji stammer and mess up their lines while Futaba tells them off for it. What was supposed to be yet another amazing scene from the Phantom Thieves has now been turned into a big joke. What the hell? Keep the badass moments in the badass moments and the funny moments in the funny moments. Don't do it both ways, it just doesn't work. The Phantom Thieves go back inside the jail afterwards and confront Shadow Konoe as they continue discussing his ideologies, before the big fight against his giant mech that's supposed to replicate Zephyr Man. This initiates a two-phase battle that I actually found to be easier than most of the other Monarchs in the game. The first one is against the Zephyr Man mech, and the other is against Konoe on foot with a big-ass sword. And not gonna lie, that suit is pretty friggin' awesome. I want this shot to be made into a poster. The second phase is also where you hear the song Counter-Strike for the first time, which fits the fast-paced nature of the battle so flawlessly. Konoe is eventually beaten and he confesses everything he's been doing, including framing the Phantom Thieves and killing his father 20 years ago. Then the Phantom Thieves make their way back home for one big celebration, but decide to make a quick stop at Yokohama, Tokyo for a fireworks festival as everyone enjoys their time together. Suddenly, Sophia starts sensing another jail underneath Tokyo itself, and they believe the source is at Tokyo Tower, where Emma's central server is. is. Things are getting pretty confusing at this point. If Medici doesn't control Emma, who does? On top of that, the people standing by Tokyo are in some sort of trance waiting to be told the key to happiness and salvation. Emma welcomes everyone to what she refers to as the Promised Land, which she automatically transports the Phantom Thieves to. This is the Jail of the Abyss, which looks awfully familiar if you play Persona 5, and as the thieves reach the center, they locate Emma, who's now taken the form of a god known as the Ark of the Covenant. It's an interesting take on the usual formula that Persona games have of fighting an almighty god at the end, but Emma's motives are practically no different. The world's in shit because humanity can't think for themselves, here let me guide the way. We've seen it so many times now, which doesn't make Emma one of the more intriguing gods in the series to me, though it's still more imaginative than Q2's ultimate villain. That one I thought was the pure definition of generic JRPG final boss. Striker's overall message is as obvious as you can imagine. Don't rely on technology so much and make your own path. Don't let some other being control you, you're your own person, yada yada yada. It's the same message as Persona 5, and while it bothers me a little that the citizens of Japan didn't learn their lesson after that game, with how easy it is to get sucked into technology and with more devices and inspirations being constructed frequently in the world, I can kinda forgive that. Anyway, the Ark of the Covenant disappears shortly after meeting the Phantom Thieves, and in her wake is none other than Ichinose, who, gasp, is the one behind everything. Maybe it's because I've played all of the other Persona games that I've come to expect a traitor by now, but this really didn't surprise me that much. In a very long explanation, Ichinose reveals that she created Emma to monitor humanity and try to understand their desires and emotions, since later on she elaborates on this by being unable to feel any herself, or at least chooses not to express any, and got picked on a lot during her younger years for it, with her current personality possibly being put on. Ichinose then sold Emma to Medici so that they could spread it across the country, making the research easier. With the public considering Emma as a granter of wishes similar to what happened in Persona 5, that counted as one of their true desires and Emma became an entity of her own. Ichinose then proceeds to tell the Phantom Thieves that Sophia is a failed prototype of Emma and is able to control her easily, demonstrating this by having her attack the party. There's a quick boss fight against the brainwashed Sophia before she starts to snap out of it after seeing Joker bleed, causing her to plummet herself into a deep pit. Afterwards, Ichinose summons a diamond to knock the rest of the Phantom Thieves over, and they have to make their way back in another short dungeon area. Once they return to Ichinose, she summons more shadows to buy her time while the diamond recharges, which unfortunately proves successful, but Sophia returns in the nick of time to block the attack. She demands that Ichinose returns her to her original state, but gets told in return about how she's nothing but a worthless doll. Ichinose proceeds to talk about her past we covered just a moment ago, and that she also threw Sophia away after she asked a question about humanity that made Ichinose angry, coming back to when Ren, Ryuji, and Morgana found Sophia in the Shibuya jail's dumpster, since Shibuya was where Ichinose grew up. Sophia explains how her experiences with the Phantom Thieves have taught her what the human heart actually is, and that she isn't some doll made to take orders, awakening to her brand new persona, evolving from Pythos to Pandora. After a last-ditch effort from Ichinose by summoning more shadows, she begs for her death, but Sophia says she should break out of that heartless personality of hers and find a different way to understand human emotions. Ichinose agrees and returns to assisting the Phantom Thieves, while more people flock towards Tokyo Tower looking for answers, and the metaverse is once again being merged with the real world, now called the Tree of Knowledge. Ichinose, in my opinion, for the time we got to see her as an antagonist, was just kind of okay. I like the idea of her being this emotionless doll that wants to learn about the human heart through Sophia and Emma, but it's so late in the game now that this doesn't get expanded any further once she joins forces with the Phantom Thieves. It feels like there's some missed potential here that just needed a little more time to be properly developed. Regardless, there's yet another short final dungeon in the Tree of Knowledge, which by now I'm starting to question why half of the jails in this game are over before you know it, while the other half are about as lengthy as you'd expect. And by the end, Emma refuses to engage in combat, kicking the Phantom Thieves into a hallway of infinite fog that they quickly escape from. Since Emma knows how calling cards work, that's not going to prove useful this time, so the thieves then decide to try it out on the public by hacking into their devices. In my opinion, this is one of the better calling cards in the game, even though the Phantom Thieves are just sitting around a computer like they're watching a YouTube video together. together. Ooh, I hope it's one of mine. Emma, now referred to as the false god Demiurge, readies herself to take the Phantom Thieves head-on in a final battle that, again, to the game's credit, does do something slightly differently to the other final bosses by having you target the Demiurge during the first phase, then have the team split up to destroy her orbs and stop her from regenerating. You can choose which party members go where, as well as who helps Joker take on the Demiurge herself at the very end. I accidentally left Joker on his own because I thought breaking the orbs would be more difficult, but I just about managed to beat the final boss on my first try. With one last all-out attack and Joker somehow pushing more force into his mid-air stab, the Demiurge is defeated, the world returns to normal, and Zenkichi says farewell to the Phantom Thieves as he goes to arrest Owada. Everyone heads back home, but sadly Ren has to leave again tomorrow before their vacation really started. But just as he's about to go, Ichinose requests that the thieves meet with her in Shibuya. While they wait for her, they notice on the news that Owada's finally been arrested thanks to Konoe's testimony, and Ichinose finally arrives explaining that the police simply let her go because they didn't believe her story. How lucky. She says that she wants to do a self-reflecting journey anyway, and suddenly Sophia speaks up to say that she wishes to tag along, hoping to take what she's learned to not only help Ichinose, but other people along the way. Sophia and the rest of the Phantom Thieves say goodbye, promising to reunite again someday, and just as she and Ichinose leave, Ren gets sent an email from Sophia containing a picture of everyone labeled treasure. Well, ain't that sweet. The credits roll as you're shown everything that happened again, and I also like how you get some exclusive shots based on the requests you completed throughout the story. That was a really nice touch. Once that's all done, the Phantom Thieves have to go their separate ways yet again, but they know for sure this time that they'll meet up again sooner than they think. I think Striker's ending is fine as it is, but it also didn't quite leave the same emotional impact to me as it did in Persona 5 or Royal. Part of that may be because at the end of those games we didn't know if the Phantom Thieves were gonna get together again. It was all left to interpretation, but now that we have a sequel that does bring them back, we know for sure this time that this isn't goodbye forever. Well, with Royal in mind, it's a little trickier to say, but again, I won't give away anything. I feel like most of the emotion in this ending came from Sophia's departure, and I think that's what Atlus and Koei Tecmo wanted to put more focus on, which is why the Phantom Thieves leaving in different directions seemed a bit more hollow. It's a bittersweet moment nevertheless, but I kinda wish that all of the main characters got as much attention as Sophia when they bid each other adieu, like in the original Persona 5 ending, where they went on one last trip together as they rode off into the sunset. I wouldn't want something exactly like that to the point of just copying and pasting, but something along those lines would have been nice. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all of my thoughts on Persona 5 Strikers. It's overall a splendid follow-up to Persona 5 and Royal, and while it may not be as fantastic as those games with its own share of problems, seeing the Phantom Thieves reunite and go on another adventure no doubt struck a chord with my inner fanboy. It is a complicated game to recommend if you've neither played Persona or a Warriors game of any kind, but if you're ever in the mood for a hack and slasher that throws in a few ideas regarding philosophy and technological advancements, then this is definitely worth checking out. It's not a perfect game by any means, but then again, neither was Persona 5 or Royal, despite being my favorite game of all time. However, the stuff that's good is really, really good, and the bad stuff for the most part can be ignored and not looked at too deeply. Many thanks for watching if you stuck to the end of both videos. One of these days I'll make another one that's under half an hour long, and hope to see you again for future Persona content and any other videos you're interested in seeing. Have yourselves a good day and take care.